My name is Eleanor Vance, and I am 31 years old. 3 weeks ago, while my mother was still recovering in a hospital bed, my brother and his wife sat in her kitchen and divided her house between themselves on a napkin. They didn't think I'd find out. They definitely didn't think I'd already known for 6 years. I smiled when my brother mentioned the plan at dinner. I nodded. What none of them knew was that my mother had visited a lawyer the year our father passed, quietly, alone, without telling anyone, including me, until much later. The next morning, my brother called the title company to begin informal transfer paperwork. The call went nowhere. The deed had not listed his name in over 5 years. Before I tell you what happened next, please hit like and subscribe. Drop your city and local time below. I love knowing where you're listening from. Now let me take you back to 7 years ago, to a kitchen that smelled like cinnamon and old wood, when my mother said something I didn't understand until that hospital room. I was 24 the year my father died. My mother's kitchen had always smelled like cinnamon and the faint mustiness of the old oak cabinets my father built before I was born. The floorboards near the sink creaked in a specific spot, always had, always would. I remember her hands that winter. Steady even as everything around us wasn't. She'd hold my hand across the table while we ate dinner in silence, her thumb tracing slow circles over my knuckles, the way she'd done since I was small. One evening, 6 months after the funeral, she set down her fork and looked at me directly. "Eleanor," she said, "people will tell you what they think is fair. Fair and right aren't always the same thing. Protect what's yours quietly, before anyone asks you to explain it." I was 24. I thought she meant something about my job, my savings. Something small. My brother Mark was different even then. At the funeral reception, while I sat with my mother holding her hand, he was in the hallway with his wife, Denise, discussing square footage. I heard the word eventually more than once. Eventually the house. Eventually the land behind it. Eventually. I didn't understand my mother's warning that winter. I would understand it 7 years later, standing outside a hospital room, listening through a door that wasn't fully closed. My mother had a stroke in late February. Mild, the doctor said. Recoverable. But it shook something loose in the family. A hunger that had been waiting politely in the corner for years. 3 days after she was admitted, I stood outside her hospital room and heard Mark on the phone with Denise. "If something happens, we need to already have a plan," he said. "Mom never made anything formal. We could handle the transition ourselves. Keep it simple. Keep the lawyers out of it." Keep it simple. Keep the lawyers out of it. That's the word they use for everything that used to be love. Simple. Transition. As if my mother's entire life could be filed under logistics. I said nothing. I walked back into her room and held her hand like nothing had happened. But I filed it away. Every word, every date, every detail of that call. Over the following weeks, I started visiting more often, quietly handling things no one else noticed. Her medication schedule, her insurance paperwork, the small details of a life that suddenly required management. Mark visited twice. Denise sent flowers and called it support. Family conversations shifted after that. Mark stopped asking how Mom was feeling and started asking what the house was realistically worth. Denise referred to the property as the asset base. Nobody asked my mother what she wanted. They asked each other what they could get. I realized something in those weeks. To them, I was just the quiet daughter who showed up and did the work, invisible in every conversation that mattered to them. I decided that invisibility would become the only thing they regretted. I found the letter in April, tucked inside my mother's recipe box, behind the index card for her cinnamon bread. The same one she'd made every winter of my childhood. It was addressed to me, in her handwriting, dated the year my father died. I didn't open it immediately. I sat with it for a full day before I finally read the single line inside. "Call Mr. Castellano. He has everything. Mom." Mr. Castellano had been my mother's lawyer for 7 years. When I met with him, he already had a thick file waiting, dated the same month as my father's funeral. "Your mother restructured the estate that winter," he explained. "She placed the house and the surrounding land into a trust, with you named as sole beneficiary and successor trustee. She said she suspected the family might assume things that weren't theirs to assume." She suspected, 7 years ago, before Mark's first phone call in that hallway, before Denise called it the asset base, My mother had built a wall around her own legacy before anyone even thought to climb it. Mr. Castellano explained the rest. Mark and Denise had been quietly asking neighbors about property values, requesting informal appraisals, even contacting a title company to explore the transfer process, while my mother was still recovering. I had overheard the exact numbers myself, Mark naming a sale price on a house that, legally, had never belonged to him. I texted Mr. Castellano 2 words that night: move forward. That same evening, I watched Mark and Denise toast quietly over dinner to getting things settled soon. They had no idea the only thing settled was something they would never touch. Mr. Castellano laid out the plan with simple clarity. The trust had been irrevocable for 7 years. Any informal transfer Mark attempted would fail at the title office automatically, since the deed itself reflected the trust, not my mother's individual name. All that's left, he said, is formally activating your role as trustee, now that she's unable to manage daily affairs herself. Once that's filed, there's no path for anyone to claim otherwise. Not now, not later. That week, Mark tried something new. He showed up at my apartment with coffee and a soft voice. "We don't need to make this complicated, Eleanor. We're still family. Let's just handle it together, the easy way." I looked at him for a long moment. "I'll think about it," I said. He smiled, certain he'd planted the right seed. My younger cousin, Priya, noticed first, the way I'd grown quiet during family calls, the way I no longer corrected Denise when she described the house as ours. "You've been somewhere else lately," Priya said one evening. "Are you okay?" I told her I was fine. I wasn't lying. I was somewhere else, already standing on the other side of what was coming. The night before I filed the paperwork, I drove to my mother's house alone. I sat in her kitchen, listening to that same creaking floorboard, breathing in cinnamon that still lingered faintly in the cabinets. I almost called Mark. I almost wanted to scream at him, to make him understand what he and Denise had tried to do while our mother couldn't even speak full sentences yet. Then I remembered her hand tracing circles on mine. The lesson I hadn't understood at 24. I cried that night, not from weakness, from clarity. I wish this were different. I wish Mark had been the kind of son who would have sat by her bed instead of calculating around it. I wish he had simply asked her what she wanted. But wishes don't hold up. The trust does. It was 11:50 p.m. when I opened my laptop at my mother's kitchen table. Mr. Castellano joined the call exactly on time. "Ready when you are, Eleanor." I signed each document slowly. The formal activation of my role as trustee. The notarized confirmation that the house, the land, and every account tied to my mother's estate were, and had always been, protected outside anyone's reach but hers, and now, mine to steward. "Your mother would be proud of how quietly you handled this," Mr. Castellano said. "No noise, no confrontation, just preparation." The clock blinked to 12:03 a.m. I am 31. I am the trustee of everything Mark and Denise spent weeks trying to divide on a napkin. And across town, in their house with the granite counters Denise loved to mention, they were likely asleep, dreaming about a transfer that would never process, a square footage that had already slipped from their hands the year our father died. They'll find that out in about 10 hours. The family gathered the next afternoon at the hospital, where my mother was finally strong enough to sit up and speak in full sentences again. Mark pulled me aside in the hallway before visiting hours ended. "Eleanor, we should talk about the house. Make things official, simplify the paperwork." I looked at him, calm. "It's already official. It has been for 7 years. His phone rang 20 minutes later. I watched his face shift as the title company representative explained why his transfer request had failed. The property held in an irrevocable trust, no informal path available, no exceptions. He looked at me like I was still the sister who quietly did the paperwork and asked nothing in return. I wasn't. I hadn't been for 7 weeks. Denise's expression didn't move at all. My mother, watching from her hospital bed, simply reached for my hand and held it the way she always had. I didn't gloat. I didn't raise my voice. I sat beside my mother and asked if she wanted water. My mother used to say that fair and right aren't always the same thing, and that I should protect what's mine quietly before anyone asks me to explain it. I always thought she meant something small. My savings, my choices, She meant something deeper. She meant, build the wall before the storm arrives, and let your silence be the only explanation anyone ever needs. Mark and Denise stopped mentioning the house entirely after that week. Their visits to my mother became less about logistics and, eventually, simply about her. Mr. Castellano still manages the trust today. We meet once a year, and he always tells me my mother knew exactly what she was protecting and exactly who she was protecting it for. As for me, I still spend Sunday afternoons in that kitchen. The floorboard still creaks near the sink. The cabinets still hold a faint trace of cinnamon, even years later. I think about my mother every time that floor creaks beneath my feet. And I think, some inheritances aren't property. They're foresight. If you've ever had to protect someone quietly while everyone else made plans around them, I want to hear your story. Tell me in the comments. And if this story moved you, subscribe. There are more to come.